Hey, I'll just put a stack here.
Yeah, that's great.
Maybe if people want to pick it up.
Hello, everybody. Fine. Hello. Bueller. Bueller. I just wanted to invite, welcome everybody to, I guess the first of three, hearings or talks about the upcoming budget and, this upcoming fiscal year. If you don't know me, my name is Roger McDonald. I am the town administrator. Today's work is basically put on by the Housing Committee and the Planning Board, and to talk about the CPA, seasonal communities, and all that. We are recording. We do have a few people online, so eventually, once this is all done, I'll put this recording actually up on the town's YouTube channel. So we're also with us today is Brett Roberts from Berkshire Regional Planning Committee, who's been helping with the Housing Committee and the Planning Board with a lot of all what we're talking about today. So
Yeah.
with that, I'll let Rob take over. Thank you.
All right. Good morning, everybody. If at any point you can't hear me, I just ask you to move a little bit. But I will try to project as much as I can. My name is Brett Roberts. I'm with Berkshire Regional Planning Commission. We are the regional planning agency in Berkshire County. We serve all 32 towns and cities in a variety of capacities. My role as principal planner for housing is really revolves around housing. And I've had the privilege to work with your planning board, your housing committee, your select board on a lot of housing issues over the past 2 years. And we'll talk quite a bit about that at the second portion of the meeting today. Before I get started, I also just want to mention that BRPC does not kind of endorse any policies for towns. We leave that to the towns to make informed decisions, but we do want to make sure you're making an informed decision. And so that's why I'm here, to make sure that you have the information that you need and that I can help with any questions that might come up. So, and the last thing I'll say before we dive into the seasonal communities portion is I do have some time for questions before we move to the CPA portion. So there is a structured time for questions, but if you have a burning question that just needs to be asked, feel free to raise your hand and I'll call on you. And I hope to have kind of a back and forth in that way. Before we get started, are there any questions about any of that? Any BRPC questions, housing questions generally? Okay.
Brett, could you start off and talk about how you're funded to be here?
Oh, great question. How am I funded to be here on a Saturday at 9 a.m., right? This is good. So BRPC has a variety of different funding sources. One of them is kind of a standard state fund that we have each year to do direct technical assistance to communities. That's called District Local Technical Assistance, or DLTA. And each town can apply to BRPC to tap into those funds. And so my time is paid for through that grant. So technical assistance directly to the town for these issues. Yeah, great. So the first topic we're going to kind of address here is seasonal communities. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on seasonal communities, how Monterey is in this position to be a potential seasonal community. And then also, yeah, we'll go from there.
Right, just one quick second.
Yeah.
On the owl, it's not actually moving. I don't know, there must be some setting.
The slides aren't moving?
Yeah, it's just the same, they're the same, it's still at the very beginning.
Let's see here.
There may be something behind it.
Let me see if I can.
There you go. That's got it.
Okay, great. Now let's see if it moves here.
Thank you.
Okay. All the tech stuff. So where did seasonal communities come from? So in 2024, August 6th, I believe, the Affordable Homes Act was passed in the Commonwealth legislature. And it was ultimately a large spending bill, $5.16 billion in spending related to housing. It was called the Housing Bond Bill, if you really want to get into it. But attached to this bond bill, there were also 50 policy initiatives to counter the rising housing costs in Massachusetts. I will say the Berkshires are not alone in this housing crisis. The entire Commonwealth is in it, and the Commonwealth is not alone. This is a nationwide problem. But this is one of the Commonwealth's approaches to this. And seasonal communities was one of those 50 policy initiatives. Massachusetts, as we all know, has kind of these two very unique regions for a very small state, Cape Cod, obviously, and the islands, as well as the Berkshires, as being these kind of unique seasonal places of destination. And so the Affordable Housing Act did two things related to seasonal communities. They set up the Seasonal Communities Advisory Council, which is the council that promulgates the regulations related to seasonal communities. They make recommendations to the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities, which is like the executive arm for housing. And they also allow for additional town designations, and I'll get into that and what that means. The second thing it did was it automatically designated some communities as seasonal communities. And how that looked, and you can tell who wrote the bill based on this, is automatically both Dukes and Nantucket counties were seasonal communities. So that is Martha's Vineyard and Nantucket, obviously. Barnstable County, any towns that had 35% of seasonal housing units or more were automatically seasonal communities. For whatever reason, Berkshire County had a higher limit. Ours were 40% seasonal housing units or more. And so and you are one of those towns that was automatically designated as a seasonal community. And so now I got to figure out how to, there we go. So Monterey, so why were you designated? So your housing stock, 53.2% of your housing stock is seasonal communities. And that's based on the 2018-2022 5-year American Community Survey. That's a large data bank that the US Census Bureau has. And this is the official number that the state works on. You can see over to the right, the map of Massachusetts and where these numbers really come out. So at the very end of the Cape, you see kind of is that the outer Cape, right? That they were all immediately designated just like Monterey. If you go to the western side of the state, you actually have kind of a weird cluster. You have Monterey, Tyringham, Beckett, Otis, Stockbridge, Alfred, Mount Washington, and Hancock met that 40% threshold. But you can see that a lot of southern Berkshire County especially, kind of have these the same characteristics as the inner Cape as well. So like Bourne, Sandwich, those towns as well. And so EOHLC looked at a second criteria as well about short-term rentals. And Monterey has 7.04% of your housing stock is a short-term rental in some form. And that's based on the Department of Revenue's tabulations of your local data. And so you are a seasonal community by legislation, but you can see the overall kind of ecosystem that we're talking about here. Are there any questions about how you got to designation? Yeah.
Not specifically, but the 7.04 as short-term rentals.
Yeah.
What is there the 53 already put us in,
Yes.
but would there have been an STR limit that put us in? And what would that be?
So for you, no, but for other towns, yes. And let me explain why. So, and I'll get to that kind of roundabout. So these were all the original towns that were designated by legislation. You can see Monterey here. You are the second highest or the third highest, right? Yeah. So Hancock has 58% seasonal, Otis has 56, and then Monterey. And you can see the towns in the other counties out on the Cape as well. And then these are the communities, and this is to your question, that were added in under regulation. And the yellow column is Berkshire County. And why they were added in is they had over 3.5, or is it 3? Yeah, over 3% short-term rentals. And so you can see there, like Egremont, Great Barrington, Lee, all have high percentages of short-term rentals compared to the rest of the Commonwealth. And so they were brought into seasonal communities under the short-term rental piece.
It was
So
3% was the.
yeah, it was a pretty low number, because in your average like Central Mass north of Worcester town, it's like practically zero, right? So you look at like Sheffield, for example, they have the lower end 14% of seasonal homes, but they still have that 3% short-term rentals. So
Where are we on the chart?
you were on the last chart. You were on the officially already designated.
Okay.
Yep. This is the second tier. And so based on that, you got here, and this is where I'm going to rely heavily on the EOHLC PowerPoint slides as well, just to make sure our messaging is consistent. But these are the designation benefits. So what do you get if you vote to be a seasonal community? These are kind of the big 5 benefits, if you will. And when I talk about this, I'm going to talk about this as a toolbox. You do not have to do any of these things, okay? This is a toolbox that if you voted to become a seasonal community, the state would hand you this toolbox and say, use as you see fit, right? These are not required things. And we'll walk through each of these individually here. So the first two are year-round housing related. So the first is a year-round housing trust. You already voted to have an affordable housing trust. And so this is kind of irrelevant for you. However, you could adopt the affordable housing trust to also be your year-round housing trust. All this means is that you would have some sort of power at a local body that would have specific funds potentially to focus on year-round housing. You do not have to do this. But again, those trusts are set up very similarly to the already existing affordable housing trust, and it gives communities that option. Second one is the year-round occupancy restrictions, and it's important to know how you do occupancy restrictions right now. So right now, under state law, you really can only restrict housing based on income. So think about housing that is only for people making 80% of the area median income or below. There are deed restrictions associated with certain homes, with certain apartment buildings that make that restriction happen. That's the only way you can do it kind of right now. However, under seasonal communities, the state is giving you the option to restrict housing to year-round occupancy. So what does that mean? If the town were to put forth funds, were to donate land, were to do any sort of local action to spur housing, they could then restrict that housing to be for people whose principal residence is that parcel for 10 months or more per year. The 10-month is kind of awkward, right? Because it's not obviously year round, it's not 12 months. But that's for technically when you go on vacation, your principal residence technically changes according to census data. So that's why that's there. And it would allow a 30-year term, unless otherwise specified, for that unit. So any housing, let's say tomorrow the town built housing, you could not do this unless you voted to become a seasonal community. Then you could restrict that housing to be for year-round residents only. Why is this here? A lot of housing, especially on the Cape, that has been built in the last 10 years are short-term condo type timeshare turnover, right? And it's done for a business model, and that's fine. But this gives the community some control over that housing development.
Brett,
Yeah.
is that retroactive or just moving forward?
Just moving forward. Yeah, all of this is just moving forward. The next two are related to who actually lives in that housing, right? So again, this right now you don't really have local preference. If you have if the town built housing and wanted to put people in that housing, you would have to go through the fair housing market process. We still have fair housing in this country. Essential public employee preference would allow towns, if again they donate land, provide funding, etc., build that housing, the town would be allowed to preference who lives there based on local employment. So if the household has at least one municipal, county, or state employee as defined by law, by state law, they have preferential option towards that new unit. So if you had a new firefighter looking to move to the Berkshires, if you had a new town administrator, hopefully not for a long time, but in the future, who's looking to move to the Berkshires but can't find housing, you could restrict a unit so that your local employees, this includes teachers, could live in that housing. This does not exist outside of some very specific examples out east. So Lexington, Mass has an affordable or housing authority. So they actually own and operate housing units. They have a few units set aside for town employees, but that's a very specific thing because you don't have a housing authority. So this allows you to do that without actually owning the housing. The second piece, and this is a little bit less relevant to the Berkshires, although not always, is artist housing. So a huge concern, think about the Outer Cape, right, where you have it was an artist colony, right? The fear was that housing costs were driving artists away. And so they were losing that creative economy, kind of the end of the Cape. And so they could restrict certain parcels for artist alone. That is also an option that you have under this regulation. And we have lots of creative economy in this part of the state as well. So that could be of interest. Al.
Does the preferential clause apply to rentals and ownership or just ownership?
Yeah, under our understanding is it's both rental and ownership. So let's say you built like 10 units of housing, you could technically restrict all of that for seasonal employees. It's important though, this is a preference. So if none of your employees, like all your employees were already local, that doesn't mean that would sit empty. It just means that when it comes open next, local employees have a preference. Please.
2 questions. Were we to build housing and use that restriction? Would it only be for Monterey employees, or would we be able to offer it to a New Marlboro employee, for example?
It's a great question. So I believe under the Mass General Law 268A, it would be any local employee
Defined.
defined, I think, kind of regionally.
Okay.
It's up to you how you define that preference. I will say, if you're a part of a regional school corporation, in my mind, that means that your regional school corporation will be allowed to have preference there, just like your town employees. I can't foresee towns writing a preference that says anyone that works in Southern Berkshire County for any town can live in this housing, but you are a part of a region, so like, it's kind of, but our read is it's very broad. But you can ultimately restrict that and have that preference however you write that. So you still have local control here.
Second question.
Oh, yes.
How do people have to prove their artists?
Yeah, it's a great, honestly, this is the most nebulous part about this. And I haven't done like a deep dive on the artist housing, only because none of you have asked me about it.
Sorry.
Yeah, you have to be defined by vocation that produces or supports artistic and literary activities. And this is actually the piece that the town can really define themselves. I'm gonna leave it there.
Right.
Yeah.
Usually artists would have to prove that the majority of their income.
Yeah.
Through that artistic activity,
Yeah,
so that's not a side hustle, but
Right.
for what they do, that's usually how that is.
With the IRS to be a qualified performing artist, it's just a level of income, it should just be like $5,000 or something.
yeah. And I'm sure each town, yeah, and so the towns would be able to define that. But it's a good question. And again, all optional. You don't have to do any of this, if you don't want to. Okay, the third piece is an optional residential property tax exemption. And so, if you've been reading the Berkshire Edge, your friend to the west here has been dealing with residential tax exemption here. I'm not going to get into the mechanics of residential tax exemption today because that's not what you're voting on. I just want to be really, really clear. You're not voting on residential tax exemption. This is an option under seasonal communities that if you were ever in the future to do residential tax exemption, you would be able to exempt up to 50% of the average assessed value of residential parcels for that exemption. What does that mean? Right now, every town in Massachusetts is allowed to have residential property tax exemption by right. You all could vote tomorrow, whether you do seasonal communities or not, to do the residential tax exemption. However, the max exemption you could ever have is 35%. Under this, you as a seasonal community can go up to 50%. All if you ever did this. Right now, this is not relevant to you because you don't have the residential tax exemption. Why would they give you this power? On the Cape, most of the towns, especially in the outer Cape, already have the residential property tax exemption, and they feel like they need more power. They need more leverage on this tool. And they think their second homeowners can afford that. And that is a local decision. This is an option. It is not what you're voting on at town meeting. It is an optional tool in your toolbox that you'll be handed by the state that you could eventually use if you wanted. And the last thing I'll say here too is this would have to go to town meeting separately. And your select board would have the power to set the percentage after that is approved by town meeting. Are there,
Is this for full-time housing?
so the residential property tax exemption is you get that percent exempts off your property value if you are a full-time resident.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does it say that up there?
Who knows? Probably not. It does not, but this is the assumed resident, like, yeah, it's already.
Fair question.
Yeah, yes, very fair.
Would you do it?
Okay. The last kind of benefit, and it's optional as well, is that the state has the capital investment plan
That's right.
that has made $4 million available this past fiscal year and this coming fiscal year. So 4 million across those 2 years, so only 2 million per fiscal year, available to seasonally to those communities who have accepted the seasonal community designation. Last year's funding is already gone. Those communities that voted to be seasonal communities last year have applied, they got those funds. A town very similar size on Martha's Vineyard to Monterey, population wise, not area wise, received about $78,000 from that grant. And so the next round of that grant, the next NOFA, as we say in my world, will be released July of 2026. And so you have to be a designated community by then to apply for those funds. All eligible communities that accept the designation are eligible for that grant. The max is 175,000, the low end's 50. All the other communities have already applied, the applications have been reviewed. And then what can you use those funds for? And I made this really big because this is the key portion here. And we can get into the details if we have questions. So planning and zoning activities are allowed under that. So we'll get to the only requirement of this program in a second that involves changing some of your zoning bylaws. And so that grant can be used to help change those zoning bylaws. Local actions for housing. So if you got, let's say, $78,000 from this grant, you could pay it out to a developer to help you develop housing here. So that is local housing action for housing development. And then public horizontal infrastructure projects to leverage housing development. Think about all the things underneath the ground that you need to do to put in new housing, right? So
Meeting. I was
your
looking at our meeting, I found I could zoom in.
in your case here, what that means is you're looking at septic systems, you're looking at package treatment plants, wells, electrical connections, any of that horizontal infrastructure that would bring housing onto the markets. Yeah.
Would that only apply if we already had it? In other words, if we, in this town, our water system couldn't accommodate
Yep.
additional people, we don't have sewer.
Yeah.
So it would have to be a new project. So let's say we wanted to put in a few houses on the Fox Hill property.
Sure.
Would that be considered a public infrastructure project? If we were putting in like a septic to service 6 homes? I'm making this up.
No, I know. Yeah. Our understanding is yes. Any infrastructure that provides for housing would be eligible under this grant.
But still only up to maximum.
Yeah. I mean, you're not extending your water line for $135,000. It's a very expensive process. Yes.
Is there a local match required?
There's no local match required. Wonderful question. This grant is, and this gets into Roger's world here, but reimbursable upon proof of payment. So like, let's say Monterey were to engage BRPC to help redo your zoning. The town will put up the funds to pay us, and then the town would be reimbursed. There's some accounting magic behind the scenes that works, but that's a different topic. Yes.
No, stand for?
No, that's notice of funding available. Versus NOFA, which is notice of funding opportunity. There's all sorts of fun lingo. Any questions about the grant itself? Okay, I do want to emphasize one thing, which is that beyond fiscal year 27, which is starting July 1st, ending the following June, we don't know what funding opportunities are available for seasonal communities after that. We do understand that the state hopes to do priority grants for seasonal communities, kind of like they do gateway communities. But there's no guarantee of another $2 million next fiscal year. All right, yeah.
Yeah, so when you apply for the grant, like say we voted in and we apply in July 2027, do we have to specify in our application what the project is?
Based on last year's application, no. It was just like you knew you had this much money. And then you were able to use it for the eligible activities. Every NOFA is different, so they could in July say, you actually need to tell us exactly what you're going to use it for. And we'll know July 1st which is actually gonna be like July 6th when they release it, so.
How will they use the grant by a certain time frame?
The understanding typically is that you have to use it within 18 months. That's a standard state grant contract. So that gives you a little bit of wiggle room. Once you pass a certain fiscal year, the state starts to knock on your door a little bit more, but.
So for infrastructure projects, since it's a reimbursable, you would have to actually spend the money for that and get reimbursed. And so that's a time frame.
Yeah.
May not be practical.
Yeah, typically, so I'll just be honest, how BRPC does this is we know the towns aren't going to be reimbursed until they pay us. So what we would typically do is we'd invoice the town. The town would then have that invoice as proof to the state, and the state would pay the town, and then the town would pay us. That's typically how the money flows. So in an infrastructure case, it depends on the contractor and the agreements and all that, but yeah.
So follow up, could that apply to planning and engineering?
Absolutely.
Infrastructure?
Absolutely, yes. So the planning and zoning activities, any sort of like RFP cost. So if you were to put out for a pre-development planning packet, right, that would be covered under this grant. Basically anything that touches housing that would promote housing would be eligible under this project, this grant. Okay, I think now we get into the one requirement. So we've just gone through all the what we would call benefits to this, right? And the state doesn't do anything unless you also have some sort of requirement. So here is the only required thing you have to do, and bear with me. Okay, so the designation requirement is all related to your zoning. Okay, so let's get into it. So this would require that the municipalities adopt zoning that permits existing undersized lots to be developed on. Okay, so I'll come back to that. And then tiny home development as of right in all single-family residential zoning districts. We'll come back to that too. So let's start with the existing undersized lots. So right now, let's look at the current situation. If you have, and honestly, I don't know how many existing undersized lots you have in Monterey. Does anybody?
26.
26, okay. So right now, if you have an existing undersized lot.
And size is a 2-acre.
Yes, so anything underneath 2 acres that doesn't already have housing on it, let's be clear. So like, let's say you have a 1 acre lot that doesn't have housing. Technically, you can't build housing on that right now. What this does is it would allow you by right to build housing on an existing undersized lot. And someone would just have to pull a building permit for it. You could, though, require that is a year-round attainable unit, which means it would be deed restricted to that seasonal, seasonal year-round restriction. And you could also put an income limit on it. So you could say no one can live in this house that makes over 100% of AMI, of an area median income. It also prohibits residential units on these existing undersized lots to be rented as short-term rentals less than 6 months. So you couldn't do like a campground type situation or something like that. And then one more thing before I get to a question on this is you still have to follow all the Title V public health restrictions, which means, especially in Monterey, if you cannot fit both a well and a sewer or a septic on that existing undersized lot, you still can't build there. So that 1 acre lot looks really good until you can't fit everything on the lot. And so I'll get to the question, Jen, yeah.
So if you have an undersized lot, but you are a second homeowner, are you still allowed to use this provision, or do you have to be a year-round resident to use this provision?
So I just want to, so you own a second home here and you also own a second lot that's undersized. You could, that's a good question. You could theoretically be a developer and you could build housing on this, but you yourself as a second homeowner, as a part-timer, couldn't live there. You would have to rent it out to someone who's full-time and makes a certain income. So yeah, this does not, anybody can build on these lots. As long as the eventual occupant meets the requirements. So I'm gonna go here, yeah.
You said anything under the current zoning, which is 2 acres. In this seasonal community paperwork.
Yep.
It said it had to be a quarter, either 10,000 square feet or quarter of what, which would be a half an acre.
Yeah, so basically any undersized lot up to that point. So
What do you mean up to that?
so if you have a quarter acre right now, if okay, so
If
yeah,
I
so-
had,
yeah.
if I had an acre and a half,
Yep,
which is under legal size to build
Yes.
on.
Yep.
But this says it has to be a quarter of the zoning,
Yeah.
which is 2 acres.
yes.
Which would make it a half acre.
Yes.
Is considered an undersized.
So it does put a floor to this existing undersized lot. So what the dimensions you're talking about, that 25%. Between 25% of your zoning and up to 2 acres, those are the developable lots. You still have power over existing undersized lots beyond, below that requirement. Does that make sense? So the quarter acre lot, beneath the quarter acre lot, you wouldn't be able to. It's that gap in between your minimum and that
And
25%.
the quarter of the 2 acres. In other words, you can build on something that is under 2 acres, but over a half acre.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I'll say too, basically that section of the regulations, it allows, it puts, restrictions on what kind of like frontage and setback requirements. Because what you could do is you have an existing lot, an existing undersized lot, and the town could say, well, you need so much setback. Well, at that point, you can't build a house on it because it's setback. So the state's trying to like limit the towns from just making this null and void in the first place.
Would I be correct that in addition to Title V, you also have to follow wetland setbacks?
Yeah.
Because my concern would be lots that are on the lake
Absolutely.
and they have to be, like, we're not letting people build closer than 100 feet. If they have a
Yeah.
half acre
Yeah.
lot,
Yeah,
there's not gonna be Title V and the house, but they still have to meet that 100 foot.
Yeah. yeah. So any building regulations that you would have otherwise on any other law is still applicable to this. Which is why, honestly, BRPC doesn't see this as a huge barrier because it's not gonna change how some of this is done. It's still gonna put the rules in place. Laura, yeah.
So I may be wrong, but I'm assuming that right now, if someone only said less than an acre, they're not getting assessed as a full value because it's unbuildable.
Good.
If this is voted in,
Yeah,
would the assessment on all of those lots automatically change to my building because they suddenly become buildable?
that is a great question. That is a great question. I do not know. That is the first time that question has come up. I mean, I'm not familiar with how you assess values of lands here. Yeah, Ken.
And just to be clear on numbers, the assessor has determined that there's 86 lots under 2 acres in Monterey. Of those 86 lots, 23 of them fall into the category of,
Okay.
so that in fact, the impact is, and of those 23, a number of them have the issues which the rights of wetlands and stuff like that, so
Yeah,
the number is very small.
What's the 86 to 23? How did those get? If we have 86, what is the 23 number?
The 23 number are the actual ones that are between a half acre and 2 acres.
Oh, the other 50
The other-
are below.
Below
half an acre.
Yeah.
I just want to also clarify that if the lot was created prior to the zoning requirements of the 2 acres, it is still buildable. So
Yeah.
I have a lot that's an acre and a half, but it was created prior to that 2 acre lot, so I'm still allowed to build on it.
exactly.
And I am assessed for the normal building lot value because of that.
Yeah. One question then.
Hopefully it doesn't open up subdevelopment of, like a parcel that's 1.5 acres, can it subdevelop into rehab?
I'm gonna go both these questions at the same time here. So first, I want to emphasize that most of the parcels that are mentioned that are already existing undersized have already been grandfathered into the system. So like we have an undersized lot owner here because it was undersized before the existing zoning, they are grandfathered in. So they can do what they need to do. It's really only for existing undersized lots that can't be developed today. But to your point, this does not cover, and you're not making new undersized lots in this case. You already have a process if someone wants to subdivide a parcel. Do a subdivision, right? This does not change that process. The goal of this and the effect of this is not to make new undersized lots. It is only to bring online those already existing undersized lots. And I'll be really honest with you, this has less to do with Berkshire County than it does the Cape. The Cape has a lot of existing undersized lots that under their current zoning cannot be built on. And I'll tell you too, what they have that we don't have, sewer and water. And so you can build on a lot without thinking about the geometry of a septic and a well. And what the state is trying to do is bring those lots online to build housing that is year-round and attainable. Yes, Mari, sorry.
That's I'm sorry, this is just the final comment. Now it makes me wonder if it's pre-existing and it's by right, and once we had zoning, you could not create a lot less than 2 acres, there shouldn't be any.
Say that one more time.
So zoning said you can't create a lot less than 2 acres.
Yes.
So therefore, anything that's under 2 acres
Yeah.
has to be
Yes.
used by right already, so this actually might not do anything.
Potentially. So, and again, each town is so different. Our guess is yes, your scenario is exactly correct. If everyone in town is doing their job, yes. There are situations, and I'm not saying Monterey, there are situations though where we do have weird situations where like, and this is really like, I'm trying to think of a good example and I don't want to call out a specific town. So I'm trying to like, let's say you have, someone owns 100 acres of farmland, right? And they had subdivided for a variety of reasons at a certain point to build housing for their kids or whatever, right? And that housing never was built, but it was subdivided into a weird kind of small lot. And no one at any point of all the checks caught it, right? And so now a landowner might be sitting on a half-acre land, or let's just say an acre of farmland, that they can never change the use of that land. And they can't really sell it to someone else because then it's not useful to that new person either. What it does is it allows that landowner to think, oh, could I put housing there? But again, this is not a situation that we foresee actually changing a whole lot. Al.
If I understand it correctly, this would allow for tiny homes where as your current bylaw may not.
And let's get to the second point here. So tiny homes, this allows, as of right, tiny homes in any of your single family residential zoning districts. It requires those tiny homes to comply with state building code. So right now you have a floor to area ratio requirements. You have size requirements on what can be built on certain lots. This would allow tiny homes by right on those single family home lots. As long as they, again, meet the same requirements, state building code, local enhancements, and sewer and water requirements. And it also allows you to regulate movable tiny homes. So under this, tiny homes would be as of right, and it would limit them to year-round housing units, but it would allow you to not allow movable tiny homes. So let's just assume you only want tiny houses on foundations. That is your right to say that. It does not allow, you could limit movable tiny homes. Again, thinking about the practical implications of this. This past winter was terrible. I'm very glad to see the sun today. A tiny home, it would cost you a fortune to I mean, literally, your septic and well might cost more than the tiny home itself. That does not mean it's not a good option for some folks, right? Some people might really like this option, and it's good to give them that option. I'm not sure this is going to change the game, you know, like, you're not gonna see tiny homes everywhere tomorrow because of this. Because again, you still have to meet your geometry on septic and well. You still have to do the local enhancements. If you have an energy, like an opt-in energy code, you still have to meet those energy codes. Because of this, we've talked to a few kind of tiny home developers. And ironically, in the Berkshires, it seems to be very expensive to heat those things. And on the Cape, apparently the wind does quite a bit of damage on them. So who knows where this is gonna be done, but it does give folks the option to do that. Yeah.
I think I know the answer, but I just want to double check. Let's say you had a 10-acre lot.
Yeah.
I seem to remember there were some weird things about the number of buildings. Right now, our zoning
Yeah.
says you can only have one resident.
Yes.
You can have a second if it's an ADU.
Yes.
And tiny house would be below the limit on that, which I think is
Yeah.
currently 900 square feet.
Yep.
Could a person who owned 10 acres build? I don't know, they can't re-subdivide, so they
Great
can
question.
still only put one on there, right?
Great question. So, yes, and this regulate, and I want to be clear on ADU versus tiny home too. So, this means that the tiny house would be the primary dwelling,
Okay.
right? So, I guess theoretically, you could have a tiny home and then an accessory dwelling unit. But again, the geometry of this is making it pretty difficult, I imagine. But this is only for primary dwelling units. So it would allow a tiny home as a primary dwelling unit. Right now, under your accessory dwelling bylaw, if you have a primary home on a lot, no matter what it looks like, you could theoretically then put a tiny home, but that wouldn't be under this, it would be an accessory dwelling unit. Lots of weird definitions here. Does that make sense? Okay.
With the ADU application for that, a tiny home wouldn't have to have a separate sewer, you could just be tapped into the main.
Yep, yeah. So this is totally separate from ADUs, but it would allow a tiny home by right in your single family residential zoning districts. Again, we don't foresee this having a huge impact. These are your requirements, yeah, sorry.
Does this affect, I'm pretty sure that ADUs can't be more than a certain percentage of square feet from the primary
Yep.
residence. Obviously, if you have a tiny home as your
Yeah,
primary residence, you can't put a 20 square foot
Yeah.
ADU
Yeah,
as another tiny home.
exactly. So again, this is kind of, you're probably not gonna do that. If you have a tiny home on a lot, you're probably not gonna put an ADU. But theoretically, the rights still exist. So,
No, the ADU says, not larger than 900 square feet and not
Yeah.
larger than, I think, half of.
Yeah.
So the tiny home would still allow an ADU of 900 square feet.
But if the tiny home is 900 square feet, then the ADU can't
Could be also 900 square feet.
Tiny home can't have nine.
Tiny homes for
There's-
be half of that.
so again, we get into the definition of these things. I think a tiny home definition is like 450.
Right.
400 and 450 square feet or less. So you couldn't have a tiny home. By definition, a tiny home would not be 900 square. Does that make sense?
No, but the ADU definition, as I understand it, is not larger than 900 square feet and not larger than half of the primary dwelling unit. So at minimum 900 square feet and not bigger.
No, it's actually the second one. So it would be, so if you had the max 400 square feet tiny home, the max is it 25%? So it'd be like what,
50%
square feet? Yeah, exactly, yeah. So,
Smaller, the two.
okay. And I think the idea again is that these are gonna go on super small lots. That you probably wouldn't do an accessory dwelling unit on anyway. So. These are your requirements. So, sorry, yes.
Tiny homes are only allowable by right on the pre-existing
Undersized
under
lot.
2 acre lots,
I believe that's correct, yes.
not allowable on 5 acre lots.
Yeah.
Okay.
What if you wanted to make them year-round rentals?
That's fine. Year-round housing units, actually you have to. So any tiny units, like any tiny houses that go onto a lot have to be year-round housing
But
units.
they could be rentals, not only.
Yeah,
Yes.
when I say year-round housing, I mean anybody who lives there. That can be a rental agreement, that can be actual ownership, like mortgage or deed or, that. Yeah, anytime we talk about year-round housing, I don't really think about, we shouldn't think about the owner, we should think about the residents. So that's a good,
But it's not, it means that that resident is there year round, not that
Exactly.
it's available year round and that you can rent it on a week or month.
oh, yes, good point. Yeah. That means the resident is there for 10 months out of the year at the minimum. Yes,
Are we going down a rabbit hole that really isn't gonna have much impact?
Yes.
probably.
Are there bigger things we should be talking about?
Yeah, probably. But these are the requirements. I want to be really clear on, and here's the kicker. Excuse me. The minute you pass seasonal communities, whenever that is, a clock starts that is 2 years long. And you need to do this one thing, which is not a little thing, to be clear. Change your zoning bylaws to meet state standards within 2 years, or you're automatically undesignated, de-designated, what's the word I'm looking for? That takes you out of seasonal communities. So if you do not do these two things, change your zoning bylaws, by the end of 2 years, you lose the designation. Automatically, EOHLC will say, sorry, you haven't met our requirements. But you have 2 years to meet that requirements. Any questions on that? We have a lot to go through, and I apologize if I'm taking too long here. So how do we adopt this?
That's something that
Yeah.
I want to say. I'm gonna read on the parade a little bit.
Sure, yeah.
We're talking about a lot of advantages of the program, and we're already a seasonal community, so it's over and done with. But you admitted yourself. Well, okay, excuse me. Thanks for correcting. It may be more appropriate for other communities than it is for Monterey. You yourself said communities out on the Cape, Keystone, et cetera, are most likely going to benefit from this. Okay? But it will be at our expense, and I think we should not. Indirectly, it is at our expense, because we all pay state income taxes. And we have a governor who's driving a runaway train and we have an increasing deficit. So you have to realize that even though it doesn't affect you visibly, it doesn't hit you right in the face, that the cost of any community that participates in this, some of that cost is coming out of your wallet.
Yeah, I can't speak necessarily to like the state budget situations or anything like that, but what I can say is when I think about the impacts of this on Monterey, I think about the local housing impacts. And when I think about, I try to stay pretty locally focused on how this will actually change housing in Monterey. I think,
But I think it's important for us not to lose sight of the fact that it comes with a price tag.
Sure.
I think it's important to note that we're designated, but we haven't adopted it.
Yeah.
And so if we want to adopt it, that makes us eligible for the grant monies that help with affordable housing. So we can get some of those tax dollars that everybody's paying back to Monterey for affordable housing.
That's a great segue too, and I just want to drive that point home. You have the option to be a seasonal community right now. You are not a seasonal community. What your town meeting vote on the warrant, whatever line item in Article 15, that vote determines whether you are or are not. If you vote to not be a seasonal community, which would be totally fine, that's your decision. You then are not a seasonal community, right? So the vote to designate is the key act that the town has to take. There are towns in Berkshire County who will not take this up, even though they've already been technically like legislatively allowed to be a seasonal community. Some will push it off. That's all good and fine, but you are not a seasonal community until you vote at town meeting. But you will be. I'm gonna go Mari and then.
If you say no, is that permanent, never forever, or can you bring it back to vote in a future year?
So our understanding is you could, if it fails, you can always bring it back. You don't have to do it this town meeting. We've already been through one town meeting season where you were technically allowed to vote on it and you didn't, which is again, fine. The Cape had a lot of communities who did accept it at that point. Our understanding is that moving forward, if you voted at any point to do this, the same things would happen. Like I said, I think Sheffield and Stockbridge have both postponed this. Sheffield to a fall town meeting, Stockbridge to next year's town meeting. But it's on your warrant, so you're voting on it. And I'll just say too, your legislative body, which is your town meeting, as you know, has to accept the designation by a majority vote. You also have the power at any point to remove yourself by the same process. If you get a year into this, let's say you vote yes in May, you get a year into it and you're like, oh, this isn't working for us, or like, whatever. You always have the power to remove yourself from these requirements.
We have to give the money back.
It's a great question. My guess is maybe, but I don't have a definitive on that. I'm gonna go here and then.
Just quickly, you mentioned our neighbors to the west early
Yes.
on. Do you see any parallels that they're seeing as a downfall to this that we would also see and benefits vice versa? I'm not hearing great things about it over there, but we're also not very similar to Great Barrington, so.
What I mentioned with Great Barrington was related to the residential tax exemption. And I won't get into that because that's not what you're voting on. So it's not what you're voting on. Each town is going to approach this differently. Great Barrington has something very key that you do not have, which is infrastructure. They have water and sewer. The lots in Great Barrington that are on water and sewer are going to be impacted by this way more than any lots in Monterey. Same for Stockbridge, actually. People don't know Stockbridge has a significant sewer and water system. And they would be impacted by this. Their calculus is going to look a little bit different because of that than Monterey's. I'll be honest. And I think that's why Stockbridge has postponed it a little bit for other Stockbridge reasons. I live there, so I can say that, but so that's kind of where that drawback on their calculus comes in.
So you're saying we vote on this and we may get somewhere between $50,000 and $175,000 if we meet all of the requirements and change our bylaws within the given time. And if not, we have to give the money back, probably. So where's the advantage to becoming a seasonal community here in Monterey?
So I want to clarify one thing. All communities that apply for those funds get those funds. So it's not like you have to meet a threshold on the grant application. You are receiving funds, a minimum of 50,000.
Right.
So you just have to put your name in the hat and they will give you money.
So we'll get $50,000 because we're tiny town.
But to your point, and I just want to emphasize too, a similar sized town on the Cape got about 78. So you are not the smallest seasonal community. You are not going to probably get the minimum. There are smaller communities than you. The second point there is, you don't have to meet zoning requirements the day you pass this. You have 2 years. And so you can receive those grant funds to help make those zoning changes to meet that 2-year timeline. Again, I cannot speak to how the money would have to be reimbursed to the state. They have not told us that. I'm just assuming that that could probably be a thing that they would attach. So that's what I'll say to that. What is the benefit? I can't tell you as your town legislative body what the benefit is beyond what we think, which is that you're going to get a toolbox of things that you can do that other towns cannot do. You can have preference for your town employees. You can have restrictions to that new housing developed by the town can have year-round restrictions. That all those benefits we went through, the state will give you this toolbox if you accept the designation and go through the requirements. Whether that toolbox is worth it is ultimately up to you and your neighbors to convince each other of those benefits. Does that answer your question? It's not satisfying, I know. But that's.
What's an example of how we wouldn't pass change the bylaws? I don't understand.
Why you wouldn't?
Yeah, what would be a situation in which we would have to not keep the money?
Again, that's, I'm your consultant. You are ultimately the town voters.
It seems like a logical question, though, to me, why would we not just put that we have small lots and in the 2 years allotted time?
I'm gonna.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think that, well, and here's the next slide is questions and discussion. So, yeah, if you all, I'm gonna take one more question and then maybe.
I think it's kind of an answer.
Yeah,
First, and a response to it. I mean, the way I think the answer to that question as I see it is. If we only know, if we know there's, as far as we know, there's only 1 year of money left. There might be more, but at this moment, at this meeting, when we're making this call, we're saying. Do we want to make changes to our town for somewhere between 50 and 175K to get a toolbox and that requires some things that personally, I don't think they're very big requirements, so I don't see it as an impediment. But I do think the question Justin asked, at a select board meeting is relevant of the tools of the, I guess, I think I called it 5 tools. The year-round housing trust, we already have a housing trust that we passed, so that's not really relevant. It would change it a little and give it some more opportunities, but not a huge change. Essential public employee preferences, I think that's a real thing. And year-round occupancy restrictions with a 30-year max also is a useful tool. I don't know how likely we are to use artist housing, and we already could do a 35% residential tax exemption that we've never had the impetus to do, and we could still do it even if we didn't pass this. So I really only see 2 of those tools being likely to be used here. So at the end of the day, when I'm thinking, I'm like, well, are those 2 tools and I'll say 75K worth changing those small things in our bylaws? I don't know the answer, but that's the question I'm asking. Because those are the tools that I see as potentially useful.
I'm gonna shift now from an informative to a kind of moderator. So I'm gonna let you talk to each other, but I'm gonna go here first, yeah.
So to answer Susan's question, the housing committee is actively pursuing the possibility of affordable housing on the Fox Hill property. We have 4 or 5 RFPs from qualified civil engineering firms to do full assessments on that property. And we hope to be able to choose one of those in the next month or 2. If we went ahead with doing that and putting affordable housing, it might be up to a total of 12 bedrooms. Because of the size and sewage requirements and so on. That tool of being able to make it preferential for local employees, nurses, etc., could have a real impact on the demographics in Monterey. And that money could go a long ways for helping us with the engineering that would be required, and so on. And so that's a very specific project we're working on where the seasonal community designation could be very helpful. As for the rest, I don't know.
I want to go back to Mara, yeah?
Yeah, so I'm still trying to wrap my head around what you said at the beginning about restricting it to year-round housing. So are you saying that if we build affordable housing up on Fox Hill right now, we can't require that someone be a full-time resident? Someone could actually flip it in short-term rental. We have no power to do that now?
So you probably do, but it's not as simple. So let's take an example. Let's say you were to build, you said 12 bedrooms. Let's say you were to build 4 single-family lots. Or I'm sorry, homes. You could sell those homes, right? Let's say you put no restriction on it. You just wanted to sell those homes, market value. Cool, great, awesome. Anybody could buy that house and anybody could do what they wanted with that house because at that point it's their property, right? So they could do short-term rental. They could flip it and sell it to somebody else. They could live there 2 months of the year, whatever they want to do. That's kind of with no restrictions. What you can technically do right now, and this is what like the RPC's recommendation to the housing committee would be, is, hey, this is public land that you're donating for housing development. You should put some restriction on that as your right as the previous landowner. And you could right now do an income restriction. Typically, that income restriction is somewhere between 60% of area median income to 100% right now on area median income. So let's say you use CPA dollars to develop housing there. Your restriction has to be 100% area median income or below. Just for reference, your area median income is like $107,000. So make that math in your head, if you will. That's kind of your limited restriction right now. My guess is that someone moving into a house that is making 80% of the area median income is probably a local teacher or a local, someone. They probably don't have a house in Florida that they go to, right? So like those income restrictions are in a way seasonal restrictions, but it does not guarantee that. And this just goes the extra step by saying for 30 years, this person, whoever owns this house, has to live here full time. Your tools are limited. This just gives you
That's a deeded restriction.
a deeded restriction. Yes. Does that make sense?
Quick question.
Yes.
Is that area median income the gross of of people in that they're applying? So two people, if our area
Yes.
median income's 107,
Great
two
question.
people making $50,000 a year can move in there. One person making $107,000 can move in there.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's just based on the number of people in the.
Yeah,
That's what.
so area median household income is based on the size of your household, up to 8, and then after 8, it just stays flat. And yeah, so if I'm let me think real quick, 80% for a one-person house in Monterey is $67,000. So fun fact, picky.
Couple things. One thing to address, Steve's. I worked at, Otis Woodlands Community Developing, and everything has a deed restriction. It's a declaration of covenants. And you can put that on Fox Hill property. Any property sold there has to adhere to whatever the deed restrictions are. Excuse me, and they do have to be renewed every 20 or 25 years, I forget which, because they've been renewed a couple of times. As far as permanent residency being a 10-month thing, and being, excuse me, able to afford, going away for the winter. So, two things. Number one, my daughter works in the school. They have more than 2 months off in the summer, and she has often toured, just gotten in a truck. She makes under $50,000 a year, but she still can get in her truck and drive cross country and has done so many summers. So then she is not a year-round resident because she isn't there for a full 10 months, even though that is her residence. The other thing is, as far as you saying you wouldn't be able to afford a Florida house. Well, I have a cousin, and she and her husband own a house in Florida. They are no longer able to travel, health reasons. However, her sister and I could go to use that house all summer, all winter. And that could be 3 or 4 months. If that's not my home, this is my residence.
Sure.
So that 10-month residency doesn't ring true or apply as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I will say too, that's only on new housing. So no one could restrict their already existing home that they're in
But to
for
restrict,
that.
I mean, you're restricting things that people would normally be doing because, and so they can't buy, I can't buy this house because I want to be away for 2.5 months.
Yeah.
The town built affordable.
I mean, the reality is we're talking about 4 houses possibly. Let's be serious here about what we're talking about. I mean, for us to deal with the housing issue in Southern Berkshires, Monterey is just taking a small chunk of that. And it's a very small chunk. And if you're talking about 4 houses or 5 houses or whatever, I mean, the reality is that we're in a crisis and we're trying to do a little. And there's always exceptions to anything. Let's not throw out the good for the perfect.
And let's just hope there's no Karen keeping track of how many nights your car doesn't come back to your house. You know, I mean, honestly.
Let's say it's 10.
Yeah.
That would mean you could rent it for 2 months if you left, right?
That is a good question, I think.
I think 10 months just means you can't rent it out.
Oh, sure, yeah.
physically.
Yeah.
What if you want to take a world tour that is, 187 days? That doesn't preclude this.
And just that is a good point. And these seasonal requirements, restrictions, right? So you were talking about the income restricted deed restrictions. Those have a lot of gray area too, right? We typically set a percentage for area median income, but if someone suddenly gets a promotion and they're making a lot more money, they don't automatically get kicked out of that house. There is a window and there is a gap that they can stay within and remain in that home, even though they might be over that 80%. My guess is, and again, these are things that the town and the state are going to work out. There is going to be similar gaps and similar windows related to that, the 10-month time frame. If it right, I'm from the Midwest. If my mom had an accident tomorrow and I needed to leave for 3 months, they're not going to kick me out of the house. There are probably a ton of provisions related to that deed restriction that make it amenable to all of life's circumstances.
But we should make sure that it is written that way.
Yes.
I mean, I rented houses in Otis Woodlands. And if it had 3 bedrooms, I wrote in the deed that there were 6 people allowed. And people would say, well, my kids want to bring friends. I said, I am not going every night and count how many, how many people are there. I said, but if you are consistently not abiding by this, then your the lease is canceled.
And quite frankly, what you just described is probably how all of this will operate, is the fact that
but we have to know that there have to be what you have written in this 15-page document are not not tied and true.
And I just want to make sure I did not write those. I'm just presenting to you, but I will say, again, you will still be the local driver on all of these conversations, even after you accept the designation. These are all options. You don't need to do anything, even if you accept the designation, but these are all options for you, and you are still the driver of your local housing market under these rules. We have some other slides about CPA as well. Is that still, are we still? Okay, we can speed through them. I know it's a lot, but I'll talk quick. Community I'm sorry.
If a town just happened to have a state-owned building.
How
does that apply? What's the state's position on working with the town?
Absolutely. And that's a huge issue for us out here who have a lot of state-owned land, right? Under a separate provision of the Affordable Homes Act, there is, it's like the state-owned conversion process or program or something like that, where any land that is deemed, the first thing that happens is the state deems that as excess property by the state. And then they approach the town and they say, hey, town, do you want to take over ownership of this parcel of land? It's been deemed excess by the state. I'll be honest, that's not really happening for the type of public land we have in Berkshire County, just because most of it's conservation land. What type of state-owned land is being discussed that way are things like community colleges that have a lot of parking, that don't need a lot of parking. We have like MCLA, there are some parcels around MCLA that might be discussed in North Adams at some point, but that's not super relevant to Monterey.
What about Swan Lodge?
Yes.
Good question. Again, that's a program that's run completely at the state level, and we don't really have any regional or local say in that. The first step is that the state is going through currently a process where they're looking at all state-owned land. And they were starting with that low-hanging fruit of old colleges, old parking lots, a lot of stuff along railroad tracks out east, the MBTA. So they'll get to us, I assume, but I can't speak to the detail of that program as much. Does that answer your question, though?
Yeah, sort of, thank you.
Yeah, just so everybody knows, Swan Lodge, I'm Tom Ryan. The state recently put out a request for interest in Swan Lodge. The leaseholders has stopped their lease. So there is an opportunity that there's going to be putting out there for a long-term lease of Swan Lodge, and they're basically accepting any expressions of interest. They haven't actually put out the request for proposal formally yet, but I think they're trying to gauge the community to see what kind of interest there is in that structure. And that's where being a member of the housing committee, I had let everybody know in the housing committee that this was coming up, and this could potentially be something where I think that in theory, the town could become a long-term leaseholder on that structure and then use that for workforce housing or, affordable housing or something of that nature. That's where I'm wearing more than one hat here today, but yeah.
And this is a good point in that all of these seasonal communities is not the end all be all. There are other tools that the state has that can be availed of, so, yeah.
I move that we go on to the CPA.
Yeah. Okay, CPA, Community Preservation Act. We're gonna fly through this, but stop me with questions. So some background. Gosh, almost 2 years ago, we did a report, potential actions on housing for the planning board. One of those actions, one of those policy tools was CPA. These were just a bunch of tools that the town could look into if they wanted related to housing. There was a survey conducted at that time with a 91% completion rate. There were 15 questions, 244 responses, which was crazy high. Like, you guys did great. We never get that high. And so this was the question about CPA. Do you support for adopting CPA? Do you support adopting? 80% of the respondents said yes. 20% said no. We also asked about the percentages. And I just wanted to give you this background as we go into this conversation as like, this is why we're here, why we're talking about CPA. So what is CPA? CPA, the Community Preservation Act, is a smart growth tool that helps communities preserve open space, preserve historic sites, create affordable housing, and develop outdoor recreational facilities. If you look on kind of the front of this card you have here, there are 3 buckets. It's weird. Sometimes I break them into 4, sometimes it's 3. Either one is fine. They mean the same thing. The map, the green towns are all the towns that have adopted CPA. The orange are cities. That's the only difference. So basically everybody on the Cape has CPA. A lot of Southern Berkshire County does. Middlesex County, all these areas have adopted CPA at this point. What does CPA look like in the Berkshires? So again, you have the map over there referencing Monterey is a little bit of an outlier in this scenario in Southern Berkshire County. The newest town to get CPA was Egremont. They voted for a 3% surcharge in 2025. They've not brought any revenue in because we haven't gone through a full tax year since our fiscal year since. The oldest town with CPA by like a week was Williamstown. They adopted 2% in 2002. Each year they get, or the total revenue in the entire life of the program has been $7 million basically. Their local surcharge has raised about $5 million of that. Their trust distribution, which we'll talk about in a second, which is state funds that come to the town because they have CPA, is about 1.9 million. You can see the average homeowner CPA cost there as well. I'm going to call, and don't hate me for this, most like Monterey in this case is probably Stockbridge. You have a very similar assessed home value as well as kind of tax base, I'll say. So total revenue in Stockbridge since 2002, they have a 3% surcharge. It's about $6.4 million over the life of the program. So a little bit less than Williamstown, but look at the difference here. Their local surcharge has raised $3.7 million. Their trust fund distribution was $2.6 million. So they have a higher CPA charge, 3%, which means the state's giving them more money here, even though they're raising less money than Williamstown. So I just want to point that out. So what does CPA funds go towards? I'm going to put these slides up. I'll highlight a few. It's in the 4 buckets I described. Open space, how have towns use it? So Beckett has done the Esau Hills Trail maintenance project. Williamstown has actually bought land for agricultural preservation restriction purposes. Stockbridge has done a lot around Chesterwood. What's some other good ones? The Mount Accessible Trail. Lennox has worked with Mass Audubon on an all-persons trail, so like an ADA accessible trail. Again, lots of options for open space. Housing, what do people do? So Beckett has done match funds for CDBG applications, which is funny. I should have asked about that earlier this month. Those are due next week. Great Barrington typically just gives a grant to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund that they run. Stockbridge also does big push to the Affordable Housing Trust Fund each year, which then supports things like the Pine Woods Housing Project, which is kind of west of town there. Williamstown, same thing. Their Williamstown Affordable Housing Trust gets a check each year. And they've done a mortgage assistance program with those funds. West Stockbridge has paid BRPC to do planning work around housing. So if Monterey didn't want to use like DLTA, that grant I mentioned at the beginning, they could use this. Lee has done a really interesting work around rental assistance programs. And these are all great housing issues.
Those are all local decisions.
Those are all of these decisions are local. You as town meeting, let's get into that in a minute, but yeah, you have local control of these funds. Historic, what are we looking at? So Pittsfield has done quite a bit around feasibility studies on old homes. They've done some restoration projects. You'll see some old churches in here. So like St. Paul's in Stockbridge, their roof restoration project has been funded through this in part. There's been some historical society restroom renovations, ADA accessibility, actual projects in Lee. So Lee paid someone to do some archiving through these funds. So a lot of interesting work here. Recreation, which again is kind of in outdoor space as well. So again, the East Heel Trail, Town Beach, pickleball court construction, Stockbridge, that was a big talk at last town meeting, was pickleball court construction. Stockbridge has also given money to their housing authority to do open space restoration around existing affordable housing in Stockbridge. Dog Park, West Stockbridge, anybody? That was a big thing, okay. And then last thing you can do with funding is you can actually bond with your CPA funds. What does that mean? So you can go out and get money for the town based on the fact that you know you will have a certain amount of money coming in through CPA. So for example, Williamstown, they had a big cost in 2005 or 7 where they wanted $1.5 million for a housing development, Cable Mills. And they obviously didn't have $1.5 million in the coffers from CPA, but they went out, got a bond for that, and were able to do that because they knew they would have consistent revenue through CPA funds. Bonding is very complicated, but it's a great tool if the town has capacity to kind of to manage this. Any questions about any of those projects before we go into how it's actually funded?
What sort of limitations? So for example,
Yeah.
I know there are, there's a process for getting the money. It's like, I know most communities, I don't know if you're gonna talk about that, but you go to the CPC, you submit an application, that sort of stuff. Are there any types of limitations? Like, for example, on my property, on the back line, there's what I think is an old 200-year-old maple syrup thing. Can I get $5,000 to fix that up?
Great question. So there are restrictions on how you can use these funds within each pot. They're pretty broad, and a lot of this is going to be decided at your local level. But let me give you kind of the state bits of this. So open space, it has to be a publicly available space. You can't spend money and then say, oh, sorry, everyone can't do this. So for example, at the Mount, I'm like 99% sure the Mount trails are open to the public.
Yes.
You don't have to pay it, you're right. So same thing there. Chesterwood, I can go walk on the grounds of Chesterwood without having to go pay admission. So that's a key part of open space. Housing, this one's very fun. They any housing developed with these funds, the income limit is actually higher. It's 100% of AMI or below. So if you built housing with these funds, you would have to have that high of an income restriction, which I think is pretty good. That also goes for any rental assistance program. You have to meet those same income limits. That's generally, you can't do direct rehab on private homes with these funds, but you can rehab already existing public housing, which isn't relevant.
But that's what like the matching funds for CDBG is, right?
Yes. Yes. Yeah. So that's a good point. Yeah. Historic, again, has to be open to,
Why don't you finish historic?
Yeah, historic has to be open to the public, has to be seen as a public benefit, right? So the Church on the Hill is open to the public. St. Paul's in Stockbridge, open to the public. It typically has to be a location of note to the community. There's like some specific language around that. So I don't know if your sugar mill, right, is gonna count as a significant local historic. But But you look at like your church downtown, right? Like that would be considered a local historic point of interest.
Now, what group or what the composition of the group that determines?
Let's get to that.
Okay,
Yeah.
get to it.
Actually, before I do that, I'm gonna do funding, but we'll get to that, I promise. CPA funding surcharges, you can do anywhere up to 3%. I think yours is 3% in your warrant. This is just showing you what other towns have done. So again, Sheffield and Lee are kind of in that middle ground. Highest surcharge at 3%. You see these towns there.
Oh, so we can change that
Yep.
at town meeting.
So what you're voting on in your warrant is to accept CPA at 3% surcharge. You can always change that future dates. You can always go back and, let's say 5 years in, no one's spent any CPA dollars, you're still at 3%. Suddenly you're like, what are we doing? Go to town meeting, you can lower that to 1%, 0.5%, why not, you know?
But I mean, can you amend it on the floor at town meeting?
Yes. Just, it's same process as any other warrant measure that can be
Okay.
amended.
How does the change in the surcharge affect the distribution from the state?
Next slide, great. All right, so why would you have a 3% surcharge when you can do a 1% surcharge? Here's the deal. So the town collects your tax, right? So on your property tax bill, there's a line that says CPA or some version of that. You see how much you're paying. The town collects that, and then the town sends that to the state. It goes into one big fund. You get your money back, you receive, you keep all that money. But the state also has, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The town keeps those funds initially. They do not go to the state. The state has a different fund, a trust fund that is paid through a variety of like state surplus dollars, which aren't a lot at the moment, and some other income tax pots. Anyway, it goes into what they call the Community Preservation Trust Fund. And this trust fund, everyone that has CPA gets the exact same percentage match back. So let's say you raised $1 million and the state had a great year and they're gonna match everyone's amount at 50% that year. You're gonna get an additional $500,000 from that round one distribution.
Regardless of your percentage.
Regardless of your percentage. So you could be at 1, 2, or 3% and still get this, what we call round one distribution. Then you go to round 2 and round 3. You still keep your local dollars. All of those are still in your coffers. Round 2 and round 3 funding is only for communities that have a 3% surcharge. And essentially what this is it's a different match level from the state. And the smaller, less affluent communities receive higher funding than the larger, more affluent communities. So for example, that slide with Stockbridge, right? They were only actually raising X amount of dollars each year, but because they are at 3%, I think last year they were matched at 100% in round 3 funding. So again, 3% surcharge actually opens up additional funds from the state for you. Any questions about that, Jen?
I just want to let people know that I made a spreadsheet that talks about what the Berkshire County towns got.
Yeah.
That.
Oh, good.
With each round of funding, in fact, there, I'd be like.
Nice. Okay, good. Reference that.
She made it sense. Yeah.
Let me do the exemptions first and then So there are some exemptions by state law that you can apply to CPA. So here are the 4 exemptions. I'm not going to talk about these last 2 because you don't have commercial industrial property in Monterey by law or by classification. But you can use the first 2 exemptions, which is low income, moderate income, senior housing exemption, and a standard residential property exemption. What does all that mean? So the first one, low, moderate income, senior housing exemption. Bear with me, this is a lot. If your property is owned and occupied by a person who would qualify for low income housing, they would be exempt. They would annually receive the exemption from the CPA surcharge. So the first part is any household that makes less than 80% of area median income is considered low to moderate income. So if you qualify under that, you could apply for this exemption and you would not have to pay that CPA surcharge. Keynote there is apply for. The next one is that area median income or that low moderate income changes depending on your age. Persons over 60 with an income less than 100% of area median income are considered moderate income seniors, they can also apply for this exemption. So, this is the low moderate income senior housing exemption. Any questions on this? And just for reference, so your area median income is 108,000. So a household of 4 or 2, sorry, are these numbers. So again, this is kind of who would apply for the exemption, who would receive the exemption. The next one is the residential property exemption. It's a standard on $100,000 exemption on all property in the town. So the first $100,000 of taxable value on residential real estate is automatically exempted. You don't have to apply for this. It's automatically applied to your bill. This is from almost 2 years ago, so bear with me on assessed value. So the average single family assessed value in Monterey was $764,000 about. That's average, so it's not yours, it's average. With the exemption, the only bit of your property tax that's subject to the surcharge is that $664,000. So again, that negative 100,000. So your property tax that's subject to the surcharge is only the property tax on that much value. Which means that your annual surcharge goes down, is down to $40. I'm just showing you the math here on how that works. Again, these are the exemptions. Any questions on the exemptions? Yeah.
I just want to clarify, because this says home value. Is it the value of the house or the value of the whole property?
Great question. It's assessed value of the parcel.
Of the whole property?
Yeah.
So it would apply to land only properties as well as home.
No, this is residential property. So.
But if I have vacant land, that's not considered residential.
That is a great question. I need to look at a tax bill, that I have access to. Yeah, so, Roger, do you know the answer to that?
No, I don't know the answer to
That is a great question. Mike,
Could you restate the question?
So the question, which is a very good question, is,
Yes.
if you have a parcel of land that doesn't have a home on it, would this exemption apply? My guess is actually no. And why I say that is, if you have like a 50-acre parcel of farmland, and that's if it's under like APR, but like my guess is it would erase the CPA charge completely if you got this exemption. So I'm gonna guess no. Your like non-residential parcel would not be exempt from this, but I'm gonna look into that. It's a good question.
I have a 2-acre parcel. It is always assessed at $133,300.
Great, okay, so
So
we'll find out.
so I would have to pay tax on that $33,000 balance after the 100,000.
Your surcharge would only be on that excess of 100,000, so you're not paying additional tax.
Correct.
But yes, you're right.
On the 33,000.
Yeah. Jen,
I think it's with a grain of salt, but just a quick Google search says that the surcharge goes on every property.
okay, great.
Our exemption is for the residential.
Okay,
The residents.
great.
But it's considered residential even if it's not a house.
Yeah, and that's when you have one classification of property in a town, yeah. Good questions. And you're at 3%. So this was a slide I pulled a while ago. I would refer you to this actually. This is probably a bit more accurate at this point than these numbers. Let's talk about adoption and then I want to talk about the committee. So town meeting adoption by simple majority is the first step. It's on your warrant, so boom, there you go, you're on your way. Step 2, if you approve it by 50% at town meeting, it's gonna go in your next general election ballot. So not the day after, right? Because that's already been, that ballot's set, I think. It would go on the next general election, which in our case is probably the midterms in November.
Yes.
And I think it always has to be a state or
Yes.
federal election, so it couldn't have been.
Actually, I learned it's not. It can be a local election if it's at least if this is passed at least 35 days before. Because Egremont passed CPA at a fall town meeting and then it was on their spring ballot the day after their spring.
Okay.
Yeah, I know, very fun stuff. Okay, so questions about the committee itself. So what happens? You pass CPA at town meeting, you pass it on the ballot. What happens then? Your select board then is tasked with forming a community preservation committee, CPC. I throw another acronym in there. The CPC is the controlling board, the deciding board for those funds that you raise at the local level. Typically, that board is made up of representatives from all these buckets, as well as typically from like your planning board. So for example, in Stockbridge, a CPC is someone from like the finance committee, someone from the Affordable Housing Trust, someone from their housing authority, their conservation commission has a rep, their parks person has a rep.
Select board?
The select board, I don't know if the select board has a rep, but that is an option. You make that committee. There are recommendations on who should be on that committee based on how the money is spent or can be spent. But that committee is typically between like 5 and 7 people. West Stockbridge is actually changing theirs right now. They had someone with housing interest on their board. But now that they have an affordable housing trust, they're changing that so that the Affordable Housing Trust has someone on the CPC. CPC takes applications typically once a year, typically in October, typically in the fall. And they have a general application process. When we get there, I can send you many applications that you can rip off of. And essentially, they take applications for applicable project or for eligible projects, I should say. And the CPC knows how much money it has, knows how much money it can budget for, and it then makes recommendations to the town meeting. And so again, CPC tells you kind of here are the projects that we would recommend, but town meeting still has the power to veto certain projects. So from my experience, at like 10 o'clock in Stockbridge, every town meeting, there is a list of all the CPC recommended projects. And in Stockbridge, there's a large list of them. And I don't know if there's an actual name for this process, but where you go down the list and if someone yells hold, right? I don't know if they have like a name for that, but bound, there's always like 3 holds. And so everything that's not been held, you vote on as a warrant item. So everything that's not been held is a yes or no vote. And then you go back and you discuss the helds. And then you vote on the helds, individually. So best case scenario is you get to vote all one time for one warrant item and all those projects are then funded. But each person does have the ability at town meeting to hold an item and then discuss it. So for example, in Stockbridge, the Main Street Cafe, what is that called? The general store, right? They had a CPA application that was recommended to be funded. And oh my gosh, it was like a 30-minute conversation at like 10 o'clock last year. And I was like, oh my gosh, why are we still here? But that is in your power. You still have the power to hold funding. Okay. Your CPC is set by your select board. You have the power on funding. Then those organizations enter into a grant agreement with the CPC. That means they all agree on how the money will be spent, how those distributions will go out. The CPC is in charge of monitoring that grant project, that grant agreement. Grant agreements typically run about 24 months from the time of funding. So any questions about that process?
How timely is the use of money? Can it be rolled over to another year?
Great question. So how the funding works is by law, you have to spend 10% in each of these buckets. So automatically 30% set aside for their individual purchases every year. That does not mean you have to spend that money. And to your question then, let's say you collect money the first year and you get no applications. That's fine. It just sits in your coffers. It sits there and you're good. You do not have to spend out the money each year. I think it's the best practice to probably encourage spending that money each year as people pay into it, but that is a good point.
If the likely projects were big, a year's worth of money wouldn't do it.
Right. Yeah. So that's where your CPC has to make some conversation or like have some policy, right? So let's say someone came in and was like, I'm trying to think of a good example. Oh, here's a good example. In West Stockbridge, we're working on this project. They had a variety of like $5,000 asks, right? So for like parks and open space and stuff, 5,000. And then here I come from BOPC with an ask for some housing money of like, I think it was like $120,000. I was working with their Affordable Housing Trust. And everyone was like, whoa, we would not be able to fund anything else if we did that $120,000 affordable housing grant. And so what we did is we ended up like negotiating down, basically with the CPC of like, okay, how much would you give us? And, and so those conversations can happen. That would also be a conversation for bonding potentially, again, which could be pretty complicated if it's not like a long-term project, but, yeah, I mean, this is not gonna solve all your problems. You're gonna have a limited pot of money. All right.
Has anybody run some numbers about what at 3%, if you take the people who would apply, I mean, we can guess how many people are gonna apply for exemptions and how much our value is and what, does anybody have any idea how much we would get in the first year of 3%? And then also, can you tell us when the state does start kicking in? Because it's not right at the beginning, correct?
We gotta stop having town administrators come to these. meetings. No, that's a good question. You can run those numbers. I have not run those numbers for you. But we can have a conversation about that if those numbers are relevant to the conversation. But yeah, that math, actually, I would encourage you all at the bottom of this page this is communitypreservation.org. They have so much data on that website. They may very well have that data on that website to show you how much at each level. But I don't have those numbers for you. Your second question was related to what again?
When the state starts kicking in.
So if we're thinking about fiscal years, let's say you pass CPA this May, it would not be on your bill until next July. Is that correct? So July of 2027.
Presuming we pass it.
Yes. Yes, presuming you pass it in November, it would not be until fiscal year 28's tax bill. Follow along with me now. After you collect the first fiscal year's worth of surcharge, that November, so we're talking November of 2028 now, is when the state would put in its first trust fund distribution.
And is that when we take applications?
You would typically take applications after the first year of raising funds. But yeah, you wouldn't really know until November how much the state is pitching in. Yeah.
Once your CPA is in place, does it make it easier to apply for other state grants to fund projects?
I don't see why it wouldn't be beneficial. So for example, a lot of state grants require matching funds, right? So they say, hey, town, this is great, but you need to put up X amount of dollars. You could use CPA dollars to match those grants if it fits those three buckets, I'll say, here on the pamphlet. So yeah, you could use that for other grant funding. You can use that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it was just the process of applying for grants is complicated.
Yeah.
Does having a CPA in place help make it a little easier, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, it could. For example, like in West Stockbridge, their CPA fund has paid BRPC to apply for grants on their behalf. That's an example of that.
But the state doesn't say, oh, look, Monterey's got a CPA.
You don't have.
We're gonna give them extra points for that.
Yes, that's a good point. Yeah, so there's no like preferential treatment for CPA. I think Vicky had a question, then I'll get to Al. Vicky, sorry, did you have a question earlier? Okay, sorry, Al.
A little bit earlier when you talked about the makeup of the CP, by the way, I've been on CP.
Oh, sure, yeah.
For a while. When you talk about the makeup of that committee, don't you have to have 2 or 3 regular members not representing other committees that actually like a chair or vice chair and then?
Yeah, I forget exactly what the state legislation says.
The other one is just representing other committees, but
yeah,
core group that are actually going to do the work.
I think you have like 2 or 3 members that are like official members.
Yeah.
But again, typically those are drawn from other committees. So again, like in Stockbridge, the finance committee has a heavy presence on the CPC just due to the nature of CPC. But I wouldn't say they're representing finance committee. They're just happen to be drawn from finance committee. Good question. Boy, we've gone through a lot today. What other questions on CPA, CPC, seasonal communities?
The town can apply for CPA monies as well, to your point.
Yeah.
When you were talking about the grants.
Oh, yes, yeah.
So the town itself can be an applicant to that.
Yes. Yeah, and typically the town is an applicant in some form. Yeah. Oh, no.
No, I'm just.
I know who you called on.
So you adopt the CPA, you did say that towns can change the amount.
Yep.
Lower, higher, can you end the program altogether?
That's a good, I knew that was gonna come up as soon as I said. I am not sure, I imagine you would be able to, for sure. At the very least, you can just do like a 0% surcharge for a while or something like that, you know? But that's a good question. I'm not clear on that. But generally speaking, most programs that you opt into, you can also opt out of.
Didn't I see somewhere that some towns put in a placeholder at like 0.5% or something like that?
Yeah, so, and, you know, why towns do that is, some towns think they need CPA funds and they pass it, and then they get no projects for years and years. And suddenly someone's like, why am I paying $90 into this each year? And no one's applying, and it's just sitting there. And that's a valid question that your taxpayer should ask. And so then the town changes the percentage to a placeholder, and then it lowers it, and it's, you know.
Just a comment on that.
Yeah.
We haven't had a CPA for a long time. And depending on who's running the CPA really makes a difference about how the town knows there is a CPA and what they apply for.
And how that,
We went with no applications because no one knew about it.
and how CPC is run is really dependent on the town. For example, in Stockbridge and in Great Barrington for that matter, they know that their affordable housing trust is a commitment those towns have. And so every year we vote, like, it's one item, $100,000 that goes directly to the affordable housing trust every year. In Stockbridge, and the same for Great Barrington. Whereas like in West Stockbridge and Lenox, affordable housing trust has to do project-based applications. So they can't have like a general affordable housing trust application. Lenox has to apply for the rental assistance program and then the mortgage assistance program and so on and so forth. So how the CPC works is really locally driven. There are best practices that we can provide you with once you get to that point, if you get to that point, but that's, yeah.
Are there any restrictions on the use of CPA funds for commercial buildings?
Again, I don't believe so. I imagine this is probably CPC set policy where it's like, what? Actually, I should rephrase this. If a commercial building or if a commercial business inhabits a historic structure, that's your way in as a commercial industry to apply for CPA funds. If you are, you know, if you've built a new warehouse on the edge of town and you just want CPA funds for XYZ thing, that's probably not going to be as relevant. The only way private businesses can actually apply is if they meet the restrictions of those 3 buckets. And one of those could be like conservation of historic space or open space, right? So, but just to spend money on your business or something like that, doesn't meet one of those other buckets, I'm not sure would be allowed.
And that would be private anyway. It wouldn't be available to the public.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. So, yeah.
But it might be if it was say about a store.
How many years old does the structure have to be eligible for a store?
That's totally up to your CPC. So, again, I can only really focus on what I've worked on. So, or what I've voted on, I guess.
It's 50 years in Sheffield, right?
I think it really depends. Sheffield also just passed theirs, so I'm not sure what they've set. Again, that's CPC policy. I think best practice is a historic building of note within the town. It doesn't need to be on the National Historic Register or the National Register of Historic Places. But it should have some sort of value to the town.
It could have state designation.
It could have state designation. It could have some sort of like other organizational designation. But again, that's CPC set policy. So for example, the Old Town Hall in Stockbridge, right? That's only actually like 1950 something year that it was built. That wouldn't necessarily meet all historic requirements by other programs, but it did for Stockbridge's CPC. So that CPC is a really important committee to make those policy decisions on how these funds are used. And again, you as the town meeting could be like, why are we spending money on a building that was built in 2000? You know, like, and you could ask those hard questions.
So if like the town hall that we considered ourselves eligible for historic funding, we could use our money that we generate from the CPA in-house, then we can also get potentially a grant from the state to help with like fixing something at the town hall.
Yeah, potentially. And again, I don't know how old that town hall is.
Parts of it are old.
Okay, yeah, I mean. Your CPC is going to be the one who should be following those regulations if there are any at all related to that. But I don't see why that case would not be applicable.
But I could think it'd be more like the town is asking the CPC for money for, say, the school.
Yeah.
School.
Yeah. Or
something like that, yeah.
a good example, Sheffield, their police station is an old building and its roof needed repairs. That would be eligible. That's why they ended up going for CPA funds initially. They had to repair the roof before they ever got CPA funds back. But they initially went for CPA because they knew they could repair the police station town or roof with CPA funds through the historic pathway, if you will.
Last question. So the money is a grant to the organization, right? And
Yep.
is that subject to all mass procurement, prevailing wage, bidding, all of those rules apply?
That's a great question as well. I would imagine so, but I actually don't know the answer to that. I imagine the grant agreement would specify those things. But yeah, I don't know for sure if that is the case. I'm trying to think of a good example of that.
Well, the St.
Yeah.
Paul's church roof, would you know?
Oh, I know. I was just thinking about that example exactly. I have no idea. I should ask more questions to the place I go to church. Yeah.
I'm not sure the answer to that, but I think it depends. So for example, a Mass Historical Commission historic grant to the Bidwell House
Yeah.
Does not have to go through procurement process, because so if it was a town hall project.
Yeah.
It probably would, so.
Yeah, that's actually,
It isn't I don't know that it necessarily applies.
Like CDBG
you're right.
funds that go to construct, they are required to follow all procurement.
Here's the difference, I think. So, and I think you're exactly right. I don't think they have to follow procurement, and here's why. So like the St. Paul's project in Stockbridge, they had procured and had started work on that project well before they ever received CPA funds. And so they already had their engineer, they already had their historic preservation folks, all that lined up. It was just a grant to an ongoing project. The difference with CDBG funds, which is, we won't even get into that here, is like, yeah, it's like federal funds, and I imagine because it's a federal state pass-through, that's why. But I think because it's locally raised funds.
But it's the state part of it.
Yeah, I'll have to look at, that's a great question. But based on what I am kind of drawing from in my mind, it would not be applicable.
I'm just gonna make a quick pitch here, because I'm hoping Mari will come to the meeting. Because I like your questions, I always learn stuff from them. I know Tom just asked me, like, is the meeting at 1 gonna be the same thing as last year, and the answer is no. Because the meeting at 1 is about what's going on in the fire, what we've done. Yes, there'll be a recap of what happened this past year with all the numbers and figures, et cetera. It's also gonna be about what the plan is to continue the building the fire department for this year, what's going on with other towns. Economic comparisons of what's happening with fire departments in other towns, what they're doing, how much they're paying their people, what the impact on us would be of doing this, those numbers, what's going on at the firehouse, kind of all of that stuff. So it's really about what's happened in the last year, as we continue this project. And it's obviously extremely relevant to your pocketbooks. So I would prefer we have the big questions and conversations answered as much as possible before having to have that debate on the floor, because it's a long work. So, the more of these things we can get discussed and talked about, and the less of it that's rumor, the better from my perspective. So I hope many of you will be there, even though it's a gorgeous day and we'd all like to be out there.
Yeah.
Do we have any idea about when we'll get more updated data on the actual demographics right now in Monterey? Because we have these figures from 2000, 22 or whatever, and we know the town's changed lots. So many Airbnbs, et cetera. Do you have any idea when we'll get
the new like census data?
So every year, like December 13th-ish, we get an update to the American Community Survey data, which includes, it's a 5-year survey estimate. So right now we're working on, that's actually, and then UHLC has to be the one who updates that data. So I'm working on, it's always weird. I'm working right now on fiscal year, or on 2024 data. So December 2024 data, which covers 2019 to 2024 survey data, which we think has kind of captured that 2020 boost in Berkshire County. The state is still working on 2023 data. And when this was passed and written, they were working on 2022 data. So this is my life, is trying to figure out what data I'm actually working with. But every December that they update it, my guess is this program will not be updated until, well, I don't really know, because they used the data they had at the passage of the law. So.
I'm Trevor on the Housing Committee. The town has subscribed to a service to provide insights on short-term rentals. Starting May, we're gonna have a meeting with the provider to onboard a bunch of members of the Housing Committee and also from town administration to gain insights on exactly those changes to inform our decisions on legislature and policy, especially going into CPA and all of these programs.
It's a great tool and I'm so proud of them.
Yeah, it's a good tool. I have another one of these at 1:30 in West Stockbridge, so I don't know if we have more questions, but I am free. I will stick around a little bit. I'm also gonna leave some cards up here if you have questions, but refer to your local committees for any more details, and I thank you all so much for being here.
And going back, thank you all very much. Also, the 1 p.m., 3 p.m. back here again, we'll be talking all about the fire budget, policies, procedures, the future, all that sort of stuff. We'll be having that conversation between 1 and 3.
See you, Mickey.
Great. And we'll be recording that as well for people online. Thank you.
Make sure you get a good lunch.
So, stick here.